Hello everyone and welcome to Celebrating Cinema. We are back for another episode all about the tales of Nightmare Alley. But before you listen to this, we hope you've already listened to our latest episode, Au revoir to Godard, or Kiriko's interview with Gaspar Noé.
It's a banner.
Yes.
Yeah.
Certified bang.
Certified banner.
This is a podcast made by Lab 111, produced by myself, music from Hugo, and artwork from Studio FFF. This episode is all about Film Noir, which is in conjunction with our program here at Lab 111, Tales from Nightmare Alley, where we're screening a whole selection of film noirs. Before we start with the cold open, I want to ask you all, what was the last film you watched?
I watched Wakanda Forever in the past week and I thought it was fabulous. I really loved it.
Yeah?
Yes.
Lived up to everything you were expecting?
Even more, it features a lot of Mayans, which I thought was really cool.
Okay. Where did you watch that?
In the film hall.
Okay, we'll cut that bit out.
Sorry.
Were they?
Tom?
In preparation for this, I decided to watch a film noir that's not in the program.
What film was it?
It was Where the Sidewalk Ends by Otto Preminger, which is one of my favorite noirs, but which I couldn't get the rights for, or I could get the rights, but there was no material.
That's weird. You can have the rights, but not the material.
Yeah, so the studio still has the rights, but there's nothing to screen it from or of. So there's no celluloid print and there's no digital copy. So it's just there. But then you can watch it on your Blu-ray that you have at home, as I did.
Hugo, what have you watched?
Well, I was watching short movies by this experimental Bulgarian director called Mara Matushka. And I met her in Lausanne at a film festival. And she was very kind because she gave all her movies to me on DVD because we got along very nicely. And I saw a couple of her films at the Lausanne Underground Film and Music Festival. And I want to screen a couple of her shorts in Amsterdam later, maybe this month, next month actually. So I was watching them and they're really nice and playful and sometimes erotic and sometimes very weird and disorienting. So I've been watching most of her films.
Nice.
Which is great. Yeah. I think you would like them as well, Kiriko.
Oh, yeah. I'd love to see them.
Very experimental and really cool.
Cute.
Yep.
But I also heard that past Saturday there was a movie screening of one of your films, Elliot.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did that go?
How did that
What was
go?
the last film that you saw? Oh, was it a film you made yourself?
Why do you think I asked the question? Yes, here at Lab 111, I screened my short animation, Dancing in the Shadows. And I think Tom can verify it popped off.
It was really good. Yeah, it was really nice. And as I said, it reminded me of Michael Dudok de Wit. And then the end came and it says, special thanks to Michael Dudok de Wit, who is, for if our listeners don't know, the director of The Red Turtle and one of the most beautiful short form animation films that he won an Oscar for, called Father and Daughter.
One of the few Dutch Oscar winners.
Yeah.
There's not that many. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you're now part
in
of
good
royalty.
Company. Yeah.
It was really nice.
Can we expect it on Mubi soon?
Working on it.
But it took you 2 years to make, right?
Yeah. A year mainly for funding and then a year.
As I said to you, it was better than Boyhood, and that took 10 extra years to make.
Extremely low bar.
Shall we get into it?
Yeah, Film Noirs.
Film Noirs, here with your cold open, it's Hugo.
So my dad has this rotating bookcase rack filled to the brim with these pocket editions of these cheap dime store novels that you could buy in gas stations across post-war America. I would always browse through them and notice the pulpy titles and the striking covers. Twisted Wives, Satan is a Woman, Girls' Dormitory, Satan is a Lesbian. The list goes on. And I was never really compelled to read them, but I did imagine how those trashy titles could play out as a film. Stories of lust and jealousy, crime and betrayal, death and desire. Little did I know that this collection of books was also the home for some absolute banners like The Big Sleep, The Maltese Falcon, and The Postman Always Rings Twice. Pulp novel staples I'd later become familiar with through their unforgettable film adaptations. And then, when I first started watching American film noirs, my dad's dime store collection began to make sense as this kind of reservoir for some of the best films ever made in the American studio system. I could bond over these films with my dad, who loved American actors like Humphrey Bogart, James Cagney, and James Dean. You know, the strong and silent types, as Tony Soprano would like to call them. And then we watched Touch of Evil, Orson Welles' genius answer to the American film noir, and got even more obsessed about cinema together. At Film Studies, I got to learn more about the cinematic era that preceded what is now commonly known as the film noir. Our professor, Jim Hurley, who sadly passed away in 2014, gave a course on Weimar cinema, about the period of filmmaking between the aftermath of World War I and the rise of Nazi Germany, which was the starting point of some of the best directors of the 20th century, including the one and only Fritz Lang, whose Dr. Mabuse and M can be seen as some of the greatest anchor points for the film noir. Generally understood as urban dramas and thrillers, film noir films are often these labyrinth-like detective and crime stories about the moral trappings of life in the crushingly big city. These are paranoid films about the darker penchants of human nature, amplified by crime syndicates, state corruption, and sexual tension. Sure, they can be pulpy, but in the hands of the right director, the cheap source material becomes a well of existential observations and deep reflections on human behavior. The best film noirs are drenched in an almost supernatural aura. It seems as if the characters are controlled by forces bigger than themselves. They're steering towards impending doom and a certain abyss, but have no way of changing their directions. This sinister vibe can be hypnotic, hallucinatory, intoxicating, or even arousing, and I can imagine why so many audiences flocked to these films and why so many directors tried to make them as well. It's the stuff that movies are simply made of, packaged in an audience-friendly format. I also understand why so many directors harken back to the film noir of yore, which begs the question, what even is a film noir anymore? With all the talk of neo-noirs and neo-neo-neo-noirs, it's hard to even define what a film noir even is. It's for this very reason that the Australian film critic Adrian Martin said that film noirs have never really existed as a genre per se, but are only kind of happening as a mode of production in a very specific time in the United States after World War II. I agree with him that the label film noir has become a kind of hollow container for a lot of films that can be attached to it. But at the same time, it's a useful way to describe the vibe of some of these unforgettably haunting and gripping films that are so delightfully twisted and fucked up, while still being able to play it for a mainstream audience. It's maybe the cinephile compromise of the ages, a type of film that's enjoyable for each and everyone. And if you want to find out what this loose definition of the film noir is all about, the only thing that you really have to do is check out the Lab 111 program that Tom compiled, that brings together some of the very best of in the genre on the big screen. I think Tom has already talked a bit about Nightmare Alley on this podcast actually, which is the inspiration for the program's title, Tales from Nightmare Alley. But there's still plenty of other cinematic goods to be found in the rest of the program, from The Killing by friend of the podcast Stanley Kubrick to the to the aforementioned A Touch of Evil by Orson Welles. But also don't miss out on Otto Preminger's Laura, Michael Curtis' Mildred Pierce, and Jules Dassin's Night and the City either, just a couple of my favorites that are part of this program. I could go on for ages about the genre and the films in the program, but I think that's exactly what the podcast is for, and that we should open up the conversation and delve into the moral ambiguity of the world of the film noir.
That was such a sweet, sweet cold open.
That was a banger.
That was a banger. Certified hit.
He's back, baby.
Wow, straight to the kisser.
Well, yeah, it's funny, Tom, like that I was talking about my dad's collection of cheap, pulpy dime store novels. Well, you actually have one of those novels here on the table where we're recording, which is the paperback version of Nightmare Alley.
So it's here and it looks terrible.
As they do.
As they do. It's falling apart. I can't remember when I picked this up. I am sure I bought it at a dime store or a secondhand, and I bought it after I saw the film.
The original, I presume, not the Guillermo del Toro remake. You know, we can get into that later.
We can, or we can just not get into it at all. So when I was in my early 20s, I was completely obsessed with film noir, and I try to see as many as possible. And
why is that?
So first, to bracket maybe a bit off of what I think film noir is that there's always been this discussion, as Hugo said, about is it a genre? Is it a style? Or is it maybe not even that? Is it maybe just a collection of themes? And I think it's mostly that. Like it is a collection of themes. It's movies that, especially in the 40s, well, maybe always have been sort of reflecting on contemporary culture in the grimmest way possible, with fate playing an extreme role in it. And always it's about a man, usually, or no, actually, if we're talking about Mildred Pierce, it's also about a woman that gets caught up in their own web of intrigue, and it's always about downfall. It sounds a bit pessimistic, but I kind of like that they're so honest and so raw about depicting a terrible condition humaine, I guess. So yeah, I don't know why, but maybe it also ties into last episode that we did with Godard. Of course, he's the sort of, he follows after this. All those French filmmakers were very much inspired by the authorship that all these filmmakers really had, and I really enjoyed that. Every noir by Preminger, for instance, really clearly has his stamp on it. It's a studio movie made in a studio movie way that really is just, sometimes they feel so fucking out there, where you go like, how is that even possible in the 1940s that you make a movie that's so freaking grim? As I said, like the film that I watched, Where the Sidewalk Ends, for instance, is a movie by Otto Preminger that's about a cop played by Dana Andrews, who also stars in Laura, who is doing an investigation of a murder of a guy who gets stabbed at a craps table. And he knows for sure that the guy who killed him was the criminal who was running the sort of craps racket. But his police officer, or the guy, his police lieutenant, says to him, you need to find the other guy that was here. And he goes there. It's clear that guy didn't kill him, but they get into an altercation and the policeman kills that guy. And then the entire movie, just a downward spiral of him trying to cover up that murder, while other people around him are solving that murder at the same time, but he's also a cop that's trying to, it's just a fucking bizarre situation. And it's so grim. It's just, at some point, he's trying to hire a lawyer for the wife of the dead guy that he killed. So the father of her is not going to get framed for that murder. And you're like, what is happening here? Like, fuck.
I think it's safe to say that many of these films are also very convoluted.
No, absolutely.
And like for very specific reasons, it's like, it's part of that entanglement, that web of lies and intrigue, and you need that convolution almost to get lost in it as well, because that's the kind of sensation that these films give you, that the audience is also lost in these murky waters that the characters in the film are trying to navigate through, and you sometimes also have to navigate through the mysterious murders and the intrigue and the betrayal and the plotting. If you're mentioning Mildred Pierce, it starts with a murder and you don't know who the killer is, and then the whole film kind of like makes you wonder who killed who and for what reason. And yeah, I don't know, that's the more ambiguity, but then also the kind of like big city specificity is what makes the genre so interesting. And
and as you said in your cold open, there's sometimes something almost surreal about the situations that people find themselves in. And that's, to bring it back to this dime store novel that I have here, that's why I like Nightmare Alley so much, because it almost surpasses that. It almost accepts the fact that it brings in that spiritualism aspect of it, that almost heightens it to such an extent where it becomes more than detective or murder. Or
exactly, because it almost becomes demonic, and there's this sense of people being possessed by something that is bigger than them, and there's many ways or many things that you can attribute it to, I guess. And in my cold open, I mentioned the big city, but the funny thing about Nightmare Alley is that it really takes place also in the fringes of kind of like society, but it also drives home the point that film noirs really come from German expressionist cinema from the Weimar era, because if you look at the films of Fritz Lang, but of course also a film like the Das Kabinett des Dr. Caligari, or maybe some films by Murnau as well, you see that the kind of evil, almost carnivalesque, surreal, hypnotic quality that can be present in those German expressionist films have found a way to travel to the United States and could become part of this kind of post-World War II film landscape, which is really interesting to me.
So Tom, for those people who haven't seen the film, could you maybe talk a little bit about what it's about?
So, Nightmare Alley is about a guy called Stanton Carlyle who, it's funny, the intro of this pulp novel says, "This is not a nice book. In frank, adult, and realistic language, the author tells the story of an unscrupulous man, the women he sleeps with." That's how you sell books.
Hot.
Hot. And the people he cheats during his career as a carnival and nightclub mind reader and professional spiritualist.
I didn't know they already wrote books about you, Tom. But that's pretty cool.
The San Francisco Chronicle says, its psychological probings are often shocking, and this is especially true of its investigations into other aspects of that curious mixture called a human being. So what? Anyway,
So that's what the movie is about.
Human beings.
Well, I believe the guy who wrote this book drank himself to death. But on another note, so it's about a guy called Stanton Carlyle, and you have no idea really who he is. You start off with him as the main protagonist of
Except
the film.
He's an unscrupulous man.
But he's an unscrupulous man. And he finds himself at a carnival where he meets up with all these carnies that in different ways try to sort of cheat people out of their money. And a very important aspect of the beginning is that there is this thing called, I can't remember what they call it. It's not the gimp, but it's
the geek.
The geek. Yeah, there you go. The geek, which is like the lush that has completely gone down the drain and that they now use as a sort of carnival degenerate attraction.
Beast man.
Yeah, beast man that only gets fed booze and it lives in a cage. And that's just there sort of more in the background. It's clearly foreshadowing from the beginning on where you hear this man scream for booze and stuff like that. But he's there and he's looking for fame. He's looking for money. It's unclear. That's very much different in the remake where you suddenly have a backstory of this guy in the Guillermo del Toro remake, which makes it very boring. It's very nice to know nothing of him. And at some point, he finds himself in touch with two people who do like mind reading, spiritual, psychic charlatan work, I would say. And he realizes that one of the guys there who is a lush, who drinks too much, has figured out this sort of code that he can use to properly mind read people. No one has ever done it, and he's never going to do it ever again. Also because he's too much of a drunk, so they can't do it.
The shifting shapes begin to clear. I see fields of grass, rolling hills, and a boy. A boy is running barefoot through the hills. A dog is with him. A dog is with him. Yes. His name was Jip. Go on. See how easy it is to hook him?
As usually happens in these films, he accidentally kills that guy. He ends up having that code and becoming really famous with it. And it sort of almost fades from that beginning into this first scene where you already see him quite famous on the marquee. His name, the big, I can't remember what he's called. He's not called, he's called the Great Stanton. He's mind reading a woman who ends up being a psychiatrist, I believe.
Yeah.
And she just doesn't trust it. She thinks he's fucking with her. But there's a beautiful moment in that scene where he, in front of like this live audience, mind reads her perfectly. But she just doesn't believe it. But there is a moment there that I really love where your suspension of disbelief as an audience member is almost, you want him to deceive in a way. Where this is something that I really also enjoy about noir. There's always a certain aspect where you want somebody to get away with murder. But you also want them to get caught because, I don't know, the moral ambiguity of the film just goes straight through the screen and into you.
I mean, it's like with Double Indemnity, where you have this affair and then there's a life insurance taken out on the husband of the wife, and the guy, he sells insurances and he's in love with her, but you're not sure if she's using him or not. But for a brief moment, they actually manage to kill the husband of the woman so they can get his life insurance, and you're like, oh, this is going great.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You made it work.
Really cool. Great stuff. And then, of course, like, it never works out the way that they intend to. And that's another of the tragedies in the film. Is not only that the husband is killed, but also that the lovers
don't get away with it.
They don't get away with it. Yeah.
We're both rotten.
Only you're a little more rotten. You got me to take care of your husband for you. And then you get Sacchetti to take care of Lola. Maybe take care of me, too. Then somebody else would have come along to take care of Sacchetti for you. That's the way you operate, isn't it, baby?
Suppose it is. Is what you've got cooked up for tonight any better?
Can you explain why Nightmare Alley is so iconic?
Yeah.
So here we go again. Spoilers. Jean-Paul Belmondo dies. No, this is a joke. Listen to our previous episode where I spoil everything with Jean-Paul Belmondo. So, yeah, it's iconic for the reasons that for a long time nobody could really see it, and that was due to this sort of dispute between the studio and the producer. The thing is that the book is way grimmer than this film. The ending of this book, which sadly Del Toro tried to do in the remake, but couldn't really make that work, is that it's almost predictable, right? What happens at the end of the film, what is foreshadowed, the carny who works himself up to be this sort of famous spiritualist, finds himself at the end of the rope, and he becomes the geek.
I might have a job you can take a crack at. Of course, it isn't much, and I'm not begging you to take it, but it's a job.
Yeah, well, that's all I want.
And we'll keep you in coffee and cakes, bottle every day, place to sleep it off in. What do you say? Anyway, it's only temporary, just until we can get a real geek.
Geek?
You know what a geek is, don't you?
Yeah. Sure, I know what a geek is.
Do you think you can handle it?
Mister, I was made for it.
The only job that he can get is to become that sort of beast man back at the carnival freak, in it for the next bottle of whiskey or anything. And when Edmund Golding made this film, the first ending that he shot was that. And when they screened it to Daryl Zanuck, who produced it, he said, hell fucking no, we ain't fucking gonna release this film. This is just way too grim. So when you watch Nightmare Alley, there's a very distinct moment at the end of the film where you can feel that there's an ending tacked on, which doesn't make it turn it into a happy ending. He's still sort of down on his luck, but the woman that he's sought after for the entire film sort of, kind of embraces him. It feels a bit better, I guess. But for that reason, after the release, they really shelved it. And for a long time, they couldn't screen it. So that's also why I wanted to do this program. When I first saw it, I was so amazed by it. But after that, it was never really screened in cinemas. And now suddenly for the 70th anniversary, there was a 4K restoration that we are now screening. But it is so iconic, mostly, I guess, for the fact that it combines aspects that you don't necessarily see in a lot of other film noirs, where, most film noirs are this detective story, and the ones that, for me, essentially really stand out are the ones that sort of figure out a way of still feeling like a film noir and having those themes, but doing it in a freaking carnival instead of the mean streets of New York or Chicago, yeah.
Really roughly put, there's a couple of kinds of film noirs. And one of the most famous ones are, of course, the adaptations of Raymond Chandler books, who is one of the biggest kind of like crime pulp writers of his time. And he made a lot of these kind of like very labyrinthesque detective stories where there's all of these kind of like crime conspiracies that spiral out of control, and there's a detective trying to make sense of the world and the things that are happening. Some of those include The Maltese Falcon and The Big Sleep, and these are kind of films that Humphrey Bogart stars in both of them. And there's this kind of like slick and coolness to it that a lot of people also associate with these classic American films, right? Guys in nice suits and very snappy dialogue, and they smoke and they are beautiful, and it's kind of like proto James Bond also as well. They get the girls in the meantime and they solve the crimes, or at least they do an attempt to solve the crime, but sometimes the crime is actually unsolvable, as is in the case of The Big Sleep, where there's just kind of like a big plot hole in the middle of the movie.
Oh yeah, we need to talk about this.
Well, I think we already talked about that. I think in the PTA podcast or something else, I think. Yeah, we did. We already mentioned that.
It's still my favorite chapter anecdote.
Yeah, well, it is a very funny one where the directors of The Big Sleep, like, they were trying to like figure out the book that the film is based on and try to figure out like, but then who murdered this guy at the beginning of the story? And then Raymond Chandler on the phone was like, I don't know. But yeah, so the funny thing about many of those films is that the crime itself doesn't really matter. It's really just more this, like, the protagonist trying to make sense of this world, and it's a world that increasingly doesn't make sense anymore. But these films are mostly, I guess, remembered for their acting chops and for this kind of like really slick and cool looking black and white, high contrast cinematography. I think we immediately have this picture of kind of like the blinds slightly closed, the light falling in, the shadows of the blinds, clouding a bit of like kind of like piercing diagonally a little bit of the wall behind the protagonist, those kind of shots.
The Dutch angle shots.
The Dutch angle stuff. Yeah. And then the cigarette is being lit and there's like a snappy conversation. Those are the kind of like iconic film noir movies. And yeah, so the other ones kind of like some of them break away with this format in some meaningful ways. I think one of the other most famous ones is Sunset Boulevard, which is, probably also one of the most iconic film noirs. Also for a very specific reason that it is a film about film. It's a film about a Hollywood diva of yore of the silent film era who's washed up in LA. So it's also a film about LA, of course, the iconic Sunset Boulevard area where a lot of rich people used to live.
Yes, you'll read the big black headlines about Norma Desmond and this Hollywood scandal. But you'll never read the true story about the rest of us who were part of it. Me, for instance, Joe Gillis, a promising young writer from Dayton, Ohio. And Betty, that nice kid I met at a Hollywood party, who knew nothing about me, but knew what she wanted.
Am I wrong in saying it was one of the first films that introduced the ending at the beginning?
Yeah, no, that's like a big film noir trope, actually, because Mildred Pierce also has that.
And I mean, Double Indemnity, I think Double Indemnity might be one of the first mainstream films from that era that actually starts, tells the entire story from a flashback.
Yeah. Exactly.
And another one, and is one of my favorites that we're sadly not screening, also does that, Out of the Past, which is an absolute freaking masterpiece with Robert Mitchum starring, is also like this weird, narratively structured part of the story is a memory, and then the other part is the now, and you go like, what the hell? It's like, it's really innovative shit that we're talking about.
No, I think there's like that's what's so captivating about the genre or the style or whatever you want to call it, is that there's so much ambition on display in so many different aspects. Sunset Boulevard, in terms of kind of like acting and the claustrophobia of this man who lives together with this washed up actress of, the golden ages of silent movies in Hollywood. It starts out like for him, like you said, Elliot, it starts out with his demise because you see the ending of the film first. But when he gets there at the beginning, it is kind of great. But then this kind of like creeping paranoia and claustrophobia sets in, and just the acting on display is absolutely incredible as well. And then, like you said, some of the kind of like narrative tricks that some of these films employ is absolutely brilliant. And I wish there were more films that now, contemporary-wise, also would kind of play around with the timeline and the whodunit aspect, but it doesn't happen that much anymore. Another very, very iconic film that breaks with the kind of like the most cliche form that we would associate with the film noir is The Night of the Hunter, also starring Robert Mitchum, which becomes much more of like a Southern Gothic kind of like story taking place outside of the big city. And it has this kind of like, survivalist in the outside of society vibe to it, where people are just incredibly isolated and thus also very vulnerable. And that's a pretty fucked up and great film as well.
With Mitchum's playing this, I believe he's not even a priest, right? He's just trying
just
to
impersonate.
He's trying to impersonate a priest with the classic love and hate tattoos on his fingers. I love that movie. I think so much that sometimes when I'm under the shower, I sing the song that he sings very threateningly outside of the children's
totally
house.
No psychotic behavior.
He just sings leaning on the everlasting arms, which is just this beautiful Christian song. And then you hear this while you see a shot of the old woman that's trying to take care of the kids sitting on the front porch with a shotgun.
Yeah. Unscrupulous behavior.
It's very unscrupulous behavior.
Leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning on the everlasting arms.
Akiriko, what's your favorite film noir, if you have one?
Well, I find, in general, I guess when it comes to film noirs, I find the experience of watching a film noir like extremely enjoyable because it has something very, for many of the reasons that you've previously named, there's a very passive aspect to it as a viewer because very often you are indeed in the beginning of the film already told what is eventually going to, like in a rom-com kind of way, And then it also has this sense of glamour, which you previously named, which makes it like, I don't know, just so delicious. However, to me, but clearly I'm by myself when it comes to this group, they all kind of become one, like the same experience I have with Tom Cruise films. They just become one big film in my head. Also because all of their names are like, film noir in my head is like the night of the evening of the girl, of the woman,
the night
of the killing, of the murder. It's one big title.
The city of the night of the city.
Yeah, night in the city and the city in the night. Yeah.
Of the streets, of the gun, of the kiss, of the...
No, that's true. Sometimes like you have Kiss of Death, but then you also have the film that you told me you watched here, Kiss Me Deadly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then they're all like, and then they're fumbly, and then they're mysterious, and then half of the time is like everything is mixed up, and then there's like 5 women involved. So to me, it's just one man, 5 women, and
one man, 5 women, one city.
Nonetheless, I mean, it doesn't make the experience less enjoyable for me.
Yeah.
I still love, and I guess one of the films that I love the most from your program that has a little bit of an unexpected twist to it, for which I guess I remember it, is Laura.
You have rarely met a girl like Laura. Few women have been so beautiful, so exotic, so dangerous to know.
You're Laura Hunt, aren't you?
Yes.
I'm Shelby Carpenter. Want to dance?
I'm not alone.
Oh, you poor girl. I bet he still does the polka.
Yes, Betsy Ross taught it to me.
It was as natural for Laura to be picked out from among thousands of alluring girls as it was for her to be surrounded by luxury, mystery, and scheming men.
Which I think is such a funky film in the sense that you're going somewhere and you're really invested in going somewhere, and halfway through the film, you're going somewhere completely different.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny that you say that those films kind of blend together, because I think that there's 2 places that I like to sit the most at in a screening room. One of them is at the front of all the seats, like the first row, so that the film becomes like really, really big, right? Like even larger than life. I love that. The other best place to sit in a screening room is all the way in the back, because then you can see the audience kind of like watching the film. So you're like one layer removed from the film, and you kind of start thinking about the act of watching a film with an audience. And the thing that I sometimes like to do is imagine myself watching a film from film history and kind of thinking, what if it was 1947 now? You know, what if we are watching this film as it came out? And then all of these films kind of would be that, Kiriko. They would kind of like all blend in together because there's just so many of those films were made and they just kind of like passed through towns and cinemas, especially in the US, of course. And I think there's something really cool about it because now we really savor, you know, some of these film noirs that are like super special and integral part of the film canon. But the joy, I guess, of seeing film noirs is also seeing the less celebrated ones or the kind of like maybe mediocre ones, if you could call them that, because those are the ones that most people also saw. And I love that they then kind of all blend together. So I don't know. These films, for me, they do warp me back to that era in a sense, or I want to project myself seeing them from standpoint of that era and just being very casual about it. Now we're being very precious about films from film history. But just being like, oh, let's just watch a movie, you know, pay $1 or whatever, 50 cents to see it, and be like, yeah, it's fine, okay, let's let's go somewhere else. I don't know, that it helps me to get into the mood of that film as well.
That's very sweet.
Yeah.
Hugo, you talk about what it'd be like to watch it at that time. Yeah. And I think one thing we're forgetting is the Hays Code. Do you guys remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah, do you want to explain a bit about the Hays Code?
I can really, really briefly explain it in a sense that there was a time when movie making was not very regulated and there was a lot of license allowed for directors and actors on set to behave in a certain way in front of the camera, which resulted in quite, you could say, rowdy films in a sense.
And this was sort of in the 1920s.
Yes, exactly. In the 1920s, we all remember, of course, the Roaring Twenties as this kind of concept. There was this time in Hollywood where the morals seemed to be very, very loose. And that was, in a sense, also reflected in the films that were being made. So the United States, being as puritanical as they actually are, they had to do something about that because it seemed to be untamable for them. So they introduced a thing called the Hays Code, which basically limited in very severe ways the way that on-screen sexuality mostly was allowed to be portrayed.
And could be talked about.
And could be talked about. Well, the interesting thing about that is that when you're talking about film noirs, you can see the creative ways that directors then try to circumvent that as well. Because sexuality, as I also said in my cold open, and erotic kind of like tension is a big part of what makes these films so special as well. However, the Hays Code was in place, so they had to find interesting creative ways to also address those themes and show them in a way without really showing them.
Yeah, and that for me makes them more sexual than when it would be spoken.
Like, I mean, it's like kind of like
show, don't tell, right?
Gets back to the Victorian era, you know, where a woman's ankle would already be like insanely hot. You know, it's like, wow, that ankle. You know, just like the barest amounts of flesh or just a suggestion of something. Of course, we all know that can sometimes be more powerful than showing the actual thing itself. It's what in film studies is called suture. It's the desire to look at the thing that the person in the film is looking at. And it's a very powerful part of film noir as well, because many of the things, as we already said, that characters go through are forbidden things. But we want to experience the forbidden things through them as well. We want to be part of their subjectivity and the things that they experience because they are wrong, because they are the things that we wouldn't dare to do maybe in our own lives as well. And that's a big, selling point of many of those films.
Yeah, and it's not just sexuality that was censored, but morality. And so that's why you see all these characters reach their demise.
Yes.
But perhaps also why we're rooting for them, because these directors put a spin on it that you're much more sympathetic, or I don't know, you're along with them for the ride.
There were so many taboos put in place that then suddenly, if there's films that address the taboos, it becomes exciting, right?
Yeah.
As a way of maybe sort of trying to look at maybe how if noir influenced future generations to come, this really reminds me of, there's a scene in North by Northwest by Alfred Hitchcock. And by the way, notorious by Alfred Hitchcock, which is also very much a film noir classic, is in the program that we're doing now. But in North by Northwest, they're sitting in a Cary Grant and his female counterpart are sitting in a train, and so she says in the film, "I never make love on an empty stomach," but it's clear that her lips say, "I never have sex on an empty stomach." And it's just this stupid Alfred Hitchcock thing to do okay, I can't get away with the word sex, but I'm just going to have her mouth it and then going to redub her saying make love. And then like seconds later, you see a train go into a tunnel. Yeah. I see where this is going. And I mean, North by Northwest, in a sense, also is very much has noir themes in it. I guess it's a bit funnier than the dark and gloomy black and white movies. But if you look at how themes that you find in noir go from the 60s via movies like through the 70s, like Taxi Driver, or I mean Point Blank by John Borman, which is also very much a very funky.
And Jean-Pierre Melville, the samurai in France, you know.
And that's interesting that you say that, because what happened, of course, is that the French directors from the Nouvelle Vague, they started sort of incorporating those films. And then you have somebody like Melville who felt he was you have the movie called An American in Paris, but he felt like he was a French man, or actually an American living in France. Yeah. So he built his own studio and he started making these films that then again also influenced Nouvelle Vague again. So it's this weird sort of
feedback loop.
This feedback loop of like culture coming from America into Europe and then being rehashed, but then also traveling back, because then of course you have Scorsese directing Taxi Driver, and then you start getting into Chinatown by Polanski, which is very much what we in that case then call a neo-noir, even though it's not so neo because it actually takes place in that time frame. Yeah, but that then does depict what was going on at the time in America. It's a movie about politicians being incredibly corrupt. And I think Nixon was stepping down at that point. So it's like those things always sort of run through even towards something like Drive, for instance, now by Winding Refn, which is the neon noir, we could almost say, right? Yeah.
Wow, you coined that. Yeah, nobody ever did that before.
I think somebody did.
That's why I also wanted to get into that with my cold open, is that the term film noir got, in a sense, diluted, but the history, or kind of like the qualities of the film noir, haven't been lost in contemporary filmmaking. There's many directors that harken back to it in interesting ways. Chinatown, even though Polanski is, a very problematic figure,
that's quite the understatement.
I love Chinatown for the fact that it uses the film noir film language to also really expose that problematic figures in society. But there's something so delightfully corrupt about that film. It is so sincerely fucked up. It's much more fucked up than many of the 1940s, 50s, 60s noirs could ever be. And I think that's really nice that you can then take that film language or those themes and a bit of those styles, make them widescreen, but also expand on the moral underpinnings that really, make those films so intense and captivating.
Los Angeles, 1937. There are lots of guys like J.J. Gittes. They're easy to find, if you want to find them.
Mr. Gittes, have we ever met?
Well, no.
Never?
Never.
Since you agree with me that we've never met before, you must also agree with me that I've never hired you to do anything, certainly not spy on my husband. I don't get tough with anyone, Mr. Gittes. My lawyer does.
You do your job. And sometimes you find the answers to questions that should never be asked.
This is a story that, at the heart, it kind of, I guess, shows that it puts incest on the same level as state corruption. And both of those things it tackles very, very well. It's very menacing. It's a very brooding and dark film. It's interesting to see how directors also really worked on their style through making those films. And, we can go back to my GOAT, the best one still working today, Michael Mann, who's
I knew this was going to happen.
Yeah.
It's just,
Well, if you watch Thief, it is also noir.
But even Heat, even Heat is
noir
sort of,
is or Heat is kind of like this novelistic approach to noir, but then Collateral is the digital answer to a film noir, and it still works. So it kind of shows the flexibility of the genre as well. There's just so many ways of going about and using it for your own style as well. It's very flexible in that sense. Hence the kind of commentary that it doesn't really exist as a genre, because it can just be so many things.
Yeah, it's funny. Anybody could make an article that says, why is a film noir.
Yeah. I mean, from Blade Runner to Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah, and Mulholland Drive and,
Yeah, so we all agree.
Well, that's a terrible way to end this episode.
No. Well, maybe because there's so many of them, it could be interesting to point towards some of the more obscure ones, or the ones that people are definitely not thinking about when they're thinking about film noir. Maybe you have examples of those.
Well, a good one from the program is A Sweet Smell of Success, which is almost entirely outside of that criminal. Well, there's criminal behavior, but more like outside of that criminals and detectives world. It's about journalism. It's about how people can be assholes. And yeah, I always thought that was a very, very strange one. It's almost because of that backdrop, it's almost an intellectual noir more than the detective ones.
I would like to then, on the other hand, point out a film in the program which to me is the quintessential film noir, which grabs on the essence of what the film noir is to me, which I think Kiss Me Deadly, which is so ridiculously entangled in a way that you are at one point also not expected to follow what you're following anymore.
He was out to get men who tortured women and killed with the ferocity of wild beasts. This was their jungle. Cut the knife! Kiss Me Deadly stars Ralph Meeker, winner of the New York Critics Award. Through his great talent, the vivid character of Mike Hammer comes to life as never before.
It's the pulpiest one, and it ends up being almost the most political one as well.
Yeah.
Because the entire MacGuffin ending is, it's like the Cold War suddenly drives right through that film.
Yeah, it's a fabulous experience.
I recently saw a film that I think you could call a film noir as well. It's not in your program, but that's also what kind of prompted the question of the obscure ones. I saw it in Lausanne at the film festival there. It's called Lady in a Cage by Walter Grauman. I'm not sure if you ever heard of it.
No, I haven't.
And it's a delightfully weird film. So it stars Olivia de Havilland, who also won an Oscar, and she was part of this golden age of Hollywood. But this is in the 1960s when these starlets of yore are getting too old, in the mainstream sense, to become the femme fatale or be the captivating leading actress. So they need to find new roles for her. And some of these roles are kind of like, maybe as a commentary on that as well, are a bit more exploitative almost. So Lady in the Cage, it stars Olivia de Havilland, and it's a really fucked up movie. So her son kind of lives in her house, even though he's quite old, he's in his 30s or whatever, and has kind of a career. And at the beginning of the movie, he's writing a letter to her in the house saying if you don't let go of me and your crushing love of me, it's very incestuous, I'm gonna fucking kill myself, okay? That's
what the
letter.
Fuck?
And so he leaves for work or whatever, leaves the letter, but she had a surgery and she has a lift working in her house. She's rich. She has a big house. So there's an elevator that goes from the ground floor to the first floor where the bedrooms are. So she's in the lift. And then there's a power cut in the house, and she's stuck in the lift, in the cage. And then there's all of these kind of degenerate junkies and alcoholics and hobos that find her house while she's in the lift and just rob the entire place clean while she's stuck in there while her son maybe is trying to kill himself. And James Caan is also one of the first roles of James Caan. He's also one of those kind of like degenerate youths who's going through the house and looting stuff, and people are getting killed in the house, and she's in the meanwhile just totally losing it. And then they find the degenerate young people find the letter and they start reading it out to her. It's very traumatic.
Oh my God, I need to fucking see this.
The cool thing about it is that it's kind of like a suburban film noir, because the whole like commentary in the film is also that all of this is happening, and she has like an alarm button in the lift that she's constantly ringing, and it makes this kind of like alarm ding, 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 ding sound outside of the house. And underneath the alarm bell outside of the house, there's a sign that says, "Help me, I'm stuck in the lift. This sound is playing."
But nobody's responding.
It's suburbia. Everybody's in the car. Nobody's responding. And there's cars going by all the time. You see them just constantly happening, and it becomes very grotesque at the end, but it's just this massive commentary on like the indifference of the individual in suburban America. And
it's also a bit like David Fincher's Panic Room.
Yeah,
like,
it has that.
Wow.
Oh, I bet he has seen that film.
Yeah,
it's
sure,
really good, and it's absolutely fucked up and very delightful. But it also goes to show how kind of like flexible the noir then is, that it kind of like takes some of those elements and exaggerates some of them and leaves some of them out of it. So yeah, can definitely recommend people looking up Lady in the Cage. Yeah.
We can easily tie this to our next episode, which will be about David Lynch, because we're doing the complete filmography of the man himself at Lab 111. And when I was driving through the cinema, I was thinking about noir and how it related to Lynch. And then I realized, like, you have the first shot of Blue Velvet, right? Where you go down and you see the white picket fence, and you see the roses, and you see the guy sprinkling the grass, played by Jean-Paul Belmondo, because he dies afterwards. Spoiler. Anyway, the camera goes down and you see vermin, or what do you call that? Insects, bugs. The symbolic depiction of everything that's wrong with America underneath the American dream. That's almost the same thing that noir does sometimes, I have the feeling. Although it doesn't really show you symbolic bugs, but it shows you what's around the corner of Nightmare Alley, right? So it's
the funny thing is that many film noirs are kind of like about the moral rod of the individual in this highly like individualized society. But Lynch, and we will get into that in the next episode, he kind of like places individuals on a very high pedestal. It's in fact not the human beings that are wrong, but it is just everything that is surrounding them in a sense. Human beings are very tragic in his films. Also, like the most evil people in Blue Velvet are also very tragic characters.
Baby just wants to fuck.
Yeah. Exactly. But they're, in a sense, always quite distinguished. And I like that about him, because some of the noirs almost seem like very cynical for like cynicism's sake. And Lynch is just maybe too good of a human being to allow that. I don't know. We'll have to find out.
Yeah, and it becomes so surreal, and that it comes, well, especially at the end of Wild at Heart, becomes magical.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, he definitely plays with it. And it also, again, goes to show how if you use that as like one of your cinematic like tools in your tool set, you can create a very expressive and surreal canvas with it if it's in the hand of the right director.
Yeah, and I would say that also the idea of the search of a solution, which is, I think, the what you kind of hope for or expect in Twin Peaks, whether you like it or not, is also the assumption that a lot of film noirs give you, that you're going to solve something exactly, and then eventually that's not what is given to you. It's humanity's darkest sides, which is eventually revealed, and that what is in the cage eventually doesn't really matter.
It's not about solving the case, it's about the friends that we lost along the way.
We will now read the name of those friends.
Tom, so when does this program end?
It's going to run until the end of December, I think.
Okay. And Lynch starts in December.
And Lynch starts... No, this is funny to explain. So Mulholland Drive is going to be re-released in a new 4K restoration at the end of December. But one of the programs that sort of put Lab 111 on the map was a complete retrospective that we did, I think, 3 to 4 years ago. When the news came for the re-release of Mulholland Drive, I thought, wouldn't it be incredibly Lynchian if I do the exact same program with the same trailer, starting on the exact same date as last time, again? So the program starts on the 29th of November, which is the exact same date that it started at in 2018.
David Lynch, The Return.
It is happening again. Yeah.
And again.
And again.
And again.
And again. And again.
Well, make sure to go and check out the films from Tales of Nightmare Alley here at Lab 111 and that genius bit of programming from Tom.
Stop it.
Stop it. David Lynch. Don't forget to listen back to our episodes, including an interview with Gaspar Noé and Jean-Luc, not with Jean-Luc.
So listen, Jean-Luc, why did you write that message on her door?
Don't forget to listen back to Kiriko's interview with Gaspar Noé and our episode on Au revoir to Godard. You can also listen to a new interview with Amelia Ullman and her feature debut, El Planeta. It stars both her mother and herself, and it's this comedy of a working class mother and daughter on the verge of losing everything. They sort of go out in style. I think you would love it, Kiriko. And Kiriko has already asked me, where can I watch this?
Yes, so where can I watch this?
Great you asked.
Is this on a streaming service?
Yeah.
A streaming platform?
Not any streaming platform.
Is it Netflix?
No, it's
Where?
Kiriko's
Oh,
favorite.
wait, is it?
Movie.
What?
Oh my God. We could have known.
A curated streaming cinema of handpicked films for your delight. You can go check it out. You get 30 days free at movie.com/lab111. Thank you very much for listening. This was a production from Lab 111, produced by myself, music from Hugo, artwork from Studio FFF. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us at Lab 111 on Instagram.
Boom, mic drop.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.